welcome to episode 20 of DAO Talk. Thank you, Kyler, for those beats. Awesome beats, member of the Content Guild, part-time DJ, awesome crypto mind on Twitter. This is DAO Talk, your one-stop shop for everything DAOs. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Frigid.
All right, Frigid, let's get into it. I feel like we just upped the vibes of DAO Talk so much with those beats, but let's dive right into some news. We're deep in a bear market right now. Would you disagree or agree?
Yeah, we're definitely in a bear market.
Don't tell DAOs that, because despite the crypto market downturn, DAO treasuries have grown by $700 million since January of 2022. So, Frigid, any thoughts on this? It's pretty straightforward. I don't know if there's many takes on this, but I think it's kind of reflective of what we talked about across this podcast the past 20 episodes.
Yeah, I think it's extremely bullish for DAOs that treasuries have grown through massive deflation in overall crypto asset prices. That's what we're seeing at Tally too. We've talked about this a bunch. Like all of Tally's metrics are at all-time highs, and it's partially because we keep shipping new product that people are using, but also DAOs are just, I wouldn't go so far as to say counter-cyclical, but they're certainly doing well relative to the market broadly. And yeah, I think it's mostly because of new DAOs or newer DAOs that have grown a lot. Like, I doubt the Uniswap treasury is bigger than it was in January. But then you have some treasuries like Olympus DAO is in the top 10. It's not in this screenshot, but their treasury has decreased massively since January. It's been doing okay for the last few months, but using January as a benchmark, it's down horrendous. But there's some newer players here, right? So ENS, it was launched prior to January, but it's just had a huge growth. They have sort of a sustainable source of treasury revenue, which is just people buying and renewing ENS names, and they charge a fee on that. And I think there's probably a long tail as well. If you were to really dig into this data set and look outside just the top 5, you're going to see a lot of new DAOs that have added a treasury. The Safe DAO just launched; they have a treasury. So the Hop DAO, they're a big Tally user. They've launched; they have a big treasury. Optimism has launched; they have a big treasury. So I think there's just been a lot of new DAOs, and then there's some DAOs that have actually grown, since January, because there's certainly a headwind. There are some DAOs that have definitely decreased in their, because they hold only their native token in the treasury, and the value of that's gone down quite a bit. But yeah, I think there's been a lot of growth to counteract that as well, which is very bullish for DAOs and Tally.
I don't think DAOs, we can say, are having a moment anymore. The moment's pretty sustained at this point. So bullish on DAOs, as we've seen from Tally's perspective. All metrics are at an all-time high. DAOs on Tally are at an all-time high, proposals, etc. So really exciting stuff for the DAO ecosystem as a whole. One of the DAOs you mentioned, Hop DAO, which is, Hop Protocol, which about a few months ago decentralized. And it is a layer 2 bridge for those who are not familiar. I think you are, if you are listening to this podcast. Our first DAO Talk interview was with the founder of Hop Protocol, Chris Winfrey. So if you want to go learn a little bit more about Hop and you want to hear from us, go check that out. It's DAO Talk interview number 1. That happened a fat minute ago, but Hop Protocol has been on Tally. They had their token airdrop a few months ago. That's about when we interviewed Chris, but they had their first on-chain proposal submitted on Tally via one of their delegates, GFX Labs, who we have also interviewed or Frigid has interviewed on DAO Talk. So really exciting stuff. This is their first proposal. A little bit of a breakdown of how they did it. I think that's probably where the meat of this discussion is going to be, is they did something kind of, I want to say interesting, but I would call it a good practice. Is they had 8, we can check out the proposal page right here on Tally. They linked or bundled 8 different snapshot proposals that pass sentiment checks. Remember, snapshot is not on chain, it is off chain, and it is purely just sentiment. So now here's what normally you would do in a DAO. You'd move from a sentiment check to an on-chain proposal. So now if this proposal passes, it is binding. It's on chain. It cannot be changed unless another proposal is submitted to revoke that. But they bundled 8 of those snapshot sentiment votes into one proposal. So if you're voting on this proposal, you are voting yes to all 8 of those snapshot votes. So
I love how GFX. So first of all, GFX are the homies. They're the people that that made this proposal, and so Getty, we interviewed on DAO Talk. He's very involved, a leader in GFX Labs. They're very involved in on-chain governance across Compound, Uniswap, and a number of other protocols. So first of all, just know they're the homies, super smart, friends of Tally. But I love how in the proposal description they're like, GFX Labs generally does not support the bundling of proposals, but we're going to bundle these proposals. And yeah, I agree with them. It's a bad idea. Like, so just at a high level, what happened here is within the Hop community, they passed a bunch of snapshot votes, which is just like a social signal. They passed a bunch of snapshot votes, and then they just, instead of having those be separate on-chain proposals to execute, they did them all as part of one proposal. And yeah, GFX Labs even says in the proposal description, like, why they explain why bundling proposals is a bad idea, which is that the social signal should not be considered binding in any way. It's just like a gut check, basically, with the community. And second of all, if there's all these proposals in here, like, people don't really know what they're voting for, they might get lazy and not actually review all of the bundled proposals inside the proposal. So even though, shout out Getty, shout out GFX Lab, I love you, you shouldn't have bundled these proposals. Like, if I'm not a delegate in Hop, but if I was, I would vote against this, because I don't think this is a good path. Like, one proposal is at a time, yo.
Yeah, I mean, it's already reached quorum. It looks like it's gonna pass, but it is kind of interesting that they even mentioned that, hey, this isn't a good practice, but we're going to do it anyway, just because of the high level of positive sentiment on Snapshot. You can see in the comment section on Tally, if you didn't know, like, when people vote on a proposal, you can leave a comment, and a lot of it is just like voting against, no to bundling, against, I cannot support the bundling of proposals in a single vote because such a mechanism is anti-ethical to democratic governance.
Yeah, so like, Hop is a very legit DAO. Like, the product is great, the team is great. Like Tommy mentioned, Chris Winfrey is great. You should listen to our interview with him. And they have a lot of legit delegates as a result of that, including a number of delegates who are like very experienced with on-chain governance. And you can see people just, like, I think some of them just are not down, right, with this approach. So anyway, not a great start to an on-chain proposal, although it looks like it's going to pass. But I'm sure the community will learn from this and maybe not bundle proposals going forward. Yeah,
this is not to shit on Hop or GFX. And the community is doing a good job of pointing it out. Like you said, I think it's going to pass, and you just got to learn from it moving forward. And we'll see what happens in the future. All right.
Dude, the bottom line, though, they're doing it on Tally. Let's go.
Based.
All the hottest new DAOs, straight to Tally.
All right. A tweet from Larry Sukernick. Many vendors selling to DAOs are realizing how political the process is. Having the best product and service isn't enough. Personal connections and champions are needed. B to DAO, business to DAO, is very similar to B2B software as a service. So, business to DAO sales is traditionally very similar to B2B sales, which I think makes a lot of sense. Frigid, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know how many B2B SaaS sales pros we have in the audience. I happen to have spent almost a decade working in B2B SaaS, so I know what Larry is talking about here. Selling like important, expensive, complicated products and services to organizations is a highly political process. It's really a matter of trust, right? Like, you have to figure out how to get trust within the community to get them to say, like, yes, we're going to invest, 1% of our treasury in this, or we're going to trust this like piece of infrastructure for our protocol, et cetera, et cetera. And you really need to do that on a human to human level. And so in DAOs, like, what does that look like, right? You basically need to build relationships with people who have a lot of voting power, whether that be people who hold a ton of the tokens or influential delegates. If you want to if you want to get stuff done, if you want to sell something to DAO, if you want to convince the DAO to like spend the treasury on something, you're going to need to build relationships directly with the people who hold a lot of voting power. You're like, I don't think in a lot of these DAOs, just coming in and being like, here's a proposal to, diversify the treasury or to, invest in a new Oracle or whatever is going to work. Like if you just come in from the outside with no context, no relationships, no understanding of the community's needs, that's going to get shot down hard. So yeah, I think this is a great point. I think the most sophisticated like B to DAO organizations are doing this, right? Like they're investing aggressively in building relationships with, people who have a lot of voting power in these DAOs.
Is this, people talk all the time about comparisons to traditional organizations and like how the shit on DAOs is, or the knock on DAOs is it's just the same. It's nothing new. It's the same organizational structure as, that's existed for 100 years. So like, can you like differentiate between why it's different or better for business to DAO, the DAO experience versus traditional business to business software as a service? If you think there is any difference at all, like what has your experience been switching from the Web 2 world to the Web 3 world as it relates to like this tweet?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more stakeholders. So in B2B sales, there are already a lot of stakeholders. Like if you're going to sell a new like customer relationship management software to a Fortune 500 company, you're probably going to have to build a closer relationship and deeply understand 30 people. And that's in a Fortune 500 company, right? In a DAO, there's probably going to be like, we don't really have any Fortune 500 size DAOs yet. So let's dial it down. Let's say it's like a mid-sized company. Maybe you're going to need to sell to 5 to 10 people. If you compare that to like the, some of the larger DAOs that we have today, like let's say you wanted to sell some kind of like risk, service to the ENS DAO, you are probably going to need to like build relationships with a much higher number of people than 5 to 10. And also like if you get, let's say you build relationships with 5 to 10 people and you fully understand them and you have them on board, that's still only going to be a relatively small percentage of the overall voting power. And if the broader community isn't aligned with those 5 to 10 people, like your proposal is still not going to pass. And not only is it not going to pass, it's going to be like really controversial and like bad look, probably going to drive a lot of traffic to Tally because there's going to be a fight, which will entertain Tommy and I, but it's probably not ideal for the person who is submitting the proposal. Whereas like in B2B, in B2B software, like in SaaS, like if you convince those 5 to 10 people, like you're good. Right. And actually we see this all the time where like there are other stakeholders in companies, including the future users of the software. And sometimes you see these like colossal failures of software implementation inside of big companies where they like sell the executive team and they try to roll it out to the employees and everyone's just like, nah, dog, nah, dog. So you kind of get that like after the deal's been signed, right? Whereas in the DAO, like, if people hopefully have done a good job with token distribution and governance engagement and people can kind of reject it before, the money is even spent.
Yeah, I think the prerequisite to everything you just said is what you mentioned at the end is there has to be good communication and good governance and good token distribution so that those stakeholders have the right to have their voice heard and they feel empowered to have their voice heard so that those decisions can be made properly. I think if that's not there under like there's a lot of things we talk about on this podcast of like, what is this isn't a real DAO, like don't call it a DAO. Like there's a lot of underlying structures and practices that need to be in place for the DAO to actually be a DAO and for the benefits of DAOs to actually be able to be experienced. So dope. Let's move right along. Speaking of Getty, who runs GFX Labs, great tweet from him. It's wild how many top tier, in air quotes, projects have 4 out of 7 multi-sig, a governance token, and use Snapshot for polling. They want the token and they want to control the protocol. You can't have it both ways. This is something we've talked about ad nauseum, and I'm sure Frigid's about to go on a little bit of a rant here. That you put this tweet on the docket for today. I'll set you loose. Let it go. Let it fly.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because we were just providing some constructive criticism to GFX Labs for bundling proposals in the hop DAO, and like that's the way it goes. Like I'm sure that some of you who know me and Tommy and know Tally, like not everything we do is perfect. It's all good. We're open to feedback. Hit us up on the Twitter. Not everyone's perfect, but what I love about Getty and GFX is they're like out there in the mix, building, trying to make DAOs better, right? And this is just an observation. Like we've talked about this before. Having a 4 out of 7 multisig where all the token holders have to trust whoever those 7 people are to execute what they want is pretty suboptimal from a overall decentralization perspective, from an autonomy perspective. Like it's just inefficient. Like there's no autonomous nature to the execution. It's probably pretty questionable from a legal perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, you would think so. So Tally just released a product called Groups, which we've talked about, which is it's a way to use Tally where the execution happens, with a multi-sig, and all of the governance is off chain, so there's no gas fees. But like we intentionally are positioning that product as like almost like an entry level type thing, where it's like maybe you're not ready to have a token, but you just want to start like doing something as a community together, using Ethereum. Great. Start a Tally group, start a Gnosis Safe, make a 4 out of 7 multisig, invite members, do some off-chain governance, et cetera, et cetera. But what Getty's calling out here is like, it's not just small new projects that are using a multisig for execution. In fact, we were just looking at the article about how overall DAO treasuries have grown. And there's a screenshot of the top 5 DAOs. I think two of those 5 use multisigs for execution. In fact, the number 2 DAO by treasury size, with over $1 billion in the treasury, billion with a B, is managed by a multisig. And so that's what Getty's calling out here, is like some of these like big influential projects that are managing like heavy assets and have like a lot of liability and, therefore should have a higher bar to their governance structure, are using a multisig. And like, that is not a good idea.
Well, the cat's out of the bag now, Frigid. I guess we're going to call shit out when we see it.
Nah, I'm not naming names. I'm just letting you know.
I'm not naming names, but if you go back 10 minutes ago on this podcast and look at the number 2 DAO by treasury size, you'll know exactly who Frigid is.
And to be clear, like I'm not trying to, these big DAOs are probably working towards more decentralization. Maybe they have a 69 out of 420 multi-sig and it's like totally okay because you have to get 69 signers. That's a joke. That's not totally okay, mostly because like it would be impossible to execute a transaction with 69 signers. I don't know if you've ever used Gnosis Safe, but like once you get past 4 signers, it's a nightmare. Like honestly, even with 4 signers, it might be a better UX to deploy a governor and like vote with NFTs. So just like do the same thing, have 7 NFTs, require a quorum of 4 out of 7, and like use the governor smart contract instead of Gnosis Safe. It's the same setup from a like execution perspective, but like it might even be easier. Like it's kind of tough to get 4 out of 7 to sign, in my opinion, using Gnosis Safe. But yeah, anyway, like I'm not trying to like be mean to anybody, but it's just like, there's a better way. It's called Open Zeppelin Governor plus Tally. Check it.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, like, we're not saying this to be mean, or same thing with Getty. Like, he's not saying it to be mean. Something I've always talked about is like, call out shit when you see it, provide a solution, and this provides a solution, and there is a solution. And if we don't call this stuff out, it's extremely destructive for, DAOs on a long time horizon. And that's something, if the longer you're in it and the more research you do and the more you read, you realize like this tweet is extremely important to understand. And if you're listening to this, you're probably a nerd like us about DAOs, and you are becoming more educated about it. And you need to understand why these issues are super, super anti like DAOs long term. And you need to be able to recognize this behavior, whether it's in your DAO, whether it's in a DAO you want to build or contributing to, et cetera. And understand there are alternatives to this. They're a little bit more work and take a little bit more of knowledge, but not that much. And every day the barrier gets lower and lower. Tally has a bunch of content going out, and a ton of other, DAO tooling companies do as well. Same thing with Bankless. Like, just understand what's happening, and understanding how to fight it is super important to this space going from super shaky ground to solid ground in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's why Frigid and I get so hyped up about it.
By the way, this all sounds like boring. It's like, you got to have better governance. One of the things that I've started doing as like a degen outside of my role at Tally is really digging into project's governance, because if a project has very thoughtful governance where they've done a good job with the token distribution, they have done a good job trying to get tokens into the hands of people who care about the protocol long term, there is trustless execution, where the community can directly control whether something happens or not with the treasury or the protocol. That is an incredibly strong signal that the people building the project care about the long term and are smart. So just something to think about there. Like, this is like another layer to it. And actually, there's a response on here in the thread. I don't know if it will come up or not, but they were like, I kind of like am optimistic that maybe it wasn't this thread, maybe it's another one. It's like, maybe over time, projects will stop using multi-sigs because the market in calling themselves a DAO, because the market will get smart enough that they actually start like putting a premium on projects that have really solid governance. But I think it's going to take some time for us to get there.
100% agree. All right, let's end on some, rapid fire news, and then a meme of the week, and then we'll get out of here. All right. A little news out of Metacartel, which is kind of like a secret. Frigid, you know a little bit more about Metacartel. You were at MCon. What is Hydra Ventures? What is Venture DAO? And what do we need to know about it? Keep it quick.
Honestly, I'm not super like familiar with this. But you're right though. Like, Metacartel, going to MCon was crazy. It's like there's all this like lore and storytelling. There's almost like a creative element to it, which I find really interesting. Yeah, I think in short, this is like fund of funds. It's like DAO investment DAO investing in investment DAOs, which is really cool. And that's definitely like an important part of the overall funding landscape in like venture capital or just traditional markets in general. With that said, like, we've talked about some of the challenges with DAOs from an investor protection standpoint over time. Like, we talked in depth about the Merit Circle incident where the DAO voted to yoink one of their investors, afterwards because they weren't doing enough. That kind of thing is like not legal and not possible to do. In traditional markets, there's like minority investor protection to prevent that. And so, we're doing fund to funds DAOs. We're still pretty early on in like the process of like what it means for a DAO to invest in another DAO. We saw the same thing go down with the Tribe DAO. We talked about that at length with the hack refund and like the governance battles over that. And so I think this will just like add more complexity to the mix, but I think that's a good thing, right? Like, we got to try this stuff, and kudos to them for going for it.
First, yoink is the best word I've ever heard in my life. So thank you for saying that today. Also, I just to hit on this, I mean, there's not much of a take here because we're still kind of unsure about it. It's just, DAO news. And I think it's something, that's important to be brought to the surface. So we're pretty like neutral here. But I love the like lore behind it, like the mythology lore, like just reading the first post or the first line of this, like this release is the Hydra is misunderstood. It has been the subject of unrelenting shitposts beginning with Hesiod in 700 BC through Euripides and Virgil right up through the rock. Like, giving a history of like unrelenting shitposting like 3,000 years ago. I fucking love it. So cool stuff coming out of Metacartel. And then something that happened right before we jumped on is Consensus, who we've partnered with, or Tally's partnered with before. I'm still kind of unsure about what this means, but it seems cool. Today, we're excited to announce that we partnered with Bankless DAO to develop the world's first ever DAO relationship. And then the tweet that follows it, I think, which gives a summary pretty well, is, what is a DAO relationship, you may ask? A DAO relationship is a mutually beneficial relationship between consensus and partner DAO. So it goes beyond just bankless DAO. I think that's important to understand. This is a new type of relationship, and we're going to see how it works long term. We provide our partner DAOs with top tier talent while giving consensus employees the opportunity to explore the broader DAO ecosystem. So pretty synergistic partnership between one of the bigger DAOs in the DAO ecosystem and one of the biggest, if not one of the biggest traditional corporations within the crypto space.
Yeah, this is really cool. So we've talked about Bankless DAO. They're kind of like a multi-headed service DAO where they have like different services they offer that, they pay for and generate revenue. It's like, a success story that's kind of, emerged out of early cohort of DAOs. Really cool. And then Consensus, they have this like crew that is trying to be like real legit from a DAO perspective, that's led by Matt Wright, who we worked really closely with on DAO NYC, and also Marta, who we interviewed on DAO Talk, where they're trying to like really get in the mix in the communities and see how Consensus can add value to DAOs. And so, one thing Consensus has is a lot of employees, and I think they have a desire for those employees to like really stay tapped in to what's happening in the market, which is incredibly important. And so I talked some with like Marta about this kind of thing in the DAO Talk interview, but the idea is like, there's sort of like opportunities for Consensus to employees to contribute to DAOs and lend their skills and expertise to DAOs, and then in return, get some of that on the ground market knowledge. So this is pretty dope. Good to see two, important like institutions in many ways in the crypto space, Consensus and Bankless, partnering up here.
Couldn't have said it better myself. A little fun DAO Talk trivia. Bankless DAO is my first job or first intro into crypto. So thank you, Bankless DAO. I would not be here without you. Something we've always talked about is how Bankless DAO just continues to pump out good services and content, and they've stuck around for a long time, and they're thriving. So really good to see some awesome partnerships coming out of there. Let's end with the meme of the week. If you're not watching, a couple of weeks into joining a DAO, and then it's a kid in a bar. I don't know how to describe it. He's like, damn, I kind of want to leave.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. It's such a weird pic. It's like a 5-year-old wearing a polo shirt, like superimposed over an empty bar, scratching his head like, what's going on here? And it says, a couple of weeks into joining a DAO, damn, I kind of want to leave. It's funny. Like we can make fun of ourselves and DAOs, and we do. And like, it's so true. Like, yeah, sometimes you join a DAO and you're like, this is so cool. It's a DAO, I'm joining it. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, wait, it's just like kind of dumb. And you just bounce. That probably happens more than any of us want to admit. So shout out to Rep3 GG for, calling it out.
Great meme. Yep.
Our boy Floppy Abe is in the replies. Somebody chose violence today. I like it. Exactly.
Hell yeah. I love Floppy.
Make sure you follow Floppy Abe. He's a beast.
Floppy's the homie, man. Love Floppy.
He keeps it real.
But yeah, that's been episode 20 of DAO Talk. Remember, if you are interested in getting all of the links, all of the extra stuff we didn't get to cover today, go subscribe to the DAO Talk newsletter, daotalk.substack.com. Go subscribe to the Tally newsletter. Go subscribe to the Tally blog, the Tally YouTube, everything. We got so much stuff coming out. Really awesome DAO content that will fulfill literally anything you could possibly want to learn about. So go check all of that out. And we will see you next week for episode 21. Kyler, can you take us out with some sick beats? Frigid.
Peace.
I'll see you next week. Peace.
Peace.